The Ottoman Empire
أذهلت العالم بطول بقائها وصمودها.
astonished the world with its longevity and resilience. I mean, at one point in history, if you mentioned the word Ottomans 3 times in front of any European king, he would faint. This is a rare occurrence in the history of empires. How did the story of Ottoman decline begin? Like all empires before and after them, they will eventually reach their end. There was a decision by the Ottoman state to ban printing. It was a decision you could call more of a socio-economic measure to consider the social and economic conditions related to the scribes. This isn't logical. No serious historian has stood up to the issue of the printing press and said that it was the reason for the decline of the Ottoman Empire. But that wasn't the justification. It was their fear of distortion. Well, that's an excuse for me. I suffered a state of weakness to the point that they called it the sick man of Europe, to the point that what did he do? He took off the robe and put on a suit. The fez went and the tarbouch came. You want to be like the one who defeated you. By God, our dignity is in wearing the turban, the robe, and the cloak. That's how you are. Enough already. You're entering a state of alienation. When Sultan Abdul Hamid took over, you feel he was a poor soul, burdened by the years of weakness and humiliation. Before him, he came after an era of conspiracies and depositions. So there was fear, and that's why he was sometimes called Habith, Yildiz, Lord of Yildiz, because after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Professor Muhammad, the cry of that Muslim woman, "O Arabs, O Muslims," still echoes. If we weep and we have the right to weep for Andalusia and weep and we have the right to weep 10 times for India, then we should weep 100 times for the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Peace be upon you, my brothers, wherever you are. Welcome to a new episode of the 100 Questions in History series. This is the series through which we answer the pressing questions that our great and vast Islamic history faces. For those who have joined us in this episode, we have reached the 8th axis, the Ottoman Empire. Where exactly are we? We're at the end of the segment, meaning we're just sitting around doing our rounds, sprinkling water and moving chairs. So, what's required of you, sir, is to go back and finish the previous episode so you can start with us in this segment. And if you're also a recent member, I'm happy to tell you that we've reached episode 49. Specifically question 79. This episode wouldn't be complete without welcoming our regular guest, Professor Muhammad Al-Harmi. Welcome, Professor Muhammad. Welcome, Abu Al-Harith. May God bless you. Question 79. Professor Muhammad is ready. We put our trust in God. Question 79 tells you, it was a long journey with the Ottomans. We're going to start working on it, but what do we want? Professionally speaking, yes. A question asks when and how the decline of the Ottoman state began, and what the story is behind this decline. How did this decline develop until it became the great empire that everyone feared? The European kings at a certain point in time, if you're talking the Ottomans, said that if any king was to faint and fall to the ground after hearing the word Ottomans, it meant that this empire, which everyone feared, had become so weak that it was called the sick man of Europe. It's truly astonishing. And not only that, they also began to think about how to divide the spoils of this state, how to divide the pie, so that they could arrange the new order as if they were certain that its collapse was inevitable. Yes, but Professor Muhammad, I kept thinking because I promised you and the viewers that I would always plant a seed of doubt in the question, which would always be an entry point to the answer. So I asked my brother, how did we enter a stage of weakness? I couldn't find a better answer than to ask if it's a doubt or a fact. We want you to prove or disprove this story. It's the story, or what has been raised about the backwardness of the Islamic world due to the Ottomans' refusal to keep pace with the scientific movement to the point that they forbade printing. Yes, and consequently, they prevented the introduction of the printing press for reasons mentioned in many sources. Okay, before we, our friend, the professor who's been with us since the beginning also loves history. He's not just someone who raises suspicions, he loves history too, but sometimes his expression fails him. He looks at us half-heartedly and says, "Wow, you're finishing the series on the Ottoman Empire without even mentioning Sultan Abdul Hamid and what happened, without mentioning the Great Arab Revolt, and so on and so forth. All of this will be covered in the next series, God willing. The next series is on foreign colonialism, and the one after that is contemporary history. Take your time, Professor Muhammad." Question 79. The microphone is yours, and as usual, I'm on the sidelines. I pray for your success and guidance. Trust in God. May God bless you, Abu al-Harith. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Praise be to God, and peace and blessings be upon the messenger of God, his family, his companions, and those who follow him. Look, sir, first of all, get well soon. May God heal you and grant you well-being. May God protect you. Take advantage of your fatigue with a weakness question. Laughs. I'm not on the weakness question. Yes, because this weakness question is intriguing, with many details. Look, let me begin. The topic of the printing press is easy and pleasant to start with, and then we'll delve into the story of weakness. Yes, I see this printing press topic as one of the interesting stories I'm telling you. It's a kind of suspicion raised about the Ottoman state, a kind of malice, not a real situation, or a genuine suspicion. If we're talking about its history, the printing press was invented in 1450. A German man named Ettenberg, something like that. I mean, the names of Austrians and Germans are a bit difficult for me. Yes, 1450, that's 3 years before the conquest of Constantinople. Wow. Well, remember when we made a map of the Ottoman state, we said that the Ottoman state remained superior, dominant, and leading until 1683, which is the date of the failure to invade Vienna for the third time, or the second major time. So, if the Ottomans stayed for about 230 years of superiority, even though they did not have the printing press. So, I want to say that this indicates that the printing press was not the secret to superiority, or the secret to advancement, or the secret because the West has had 200 years of printing presses and we do not have, sir, 200 years of printing presses. So even if I mean to say, with the slightest opinion, if you look at the dates, you will see that the issue was not what, it was not the difference in the movement of the Ottoman state, okay, I mean, the invention was not a difference in the movement of the Ottoman state, okay, but does that mean that I am first answering a question, that the issue of excellence, weakness, collapse, and scientific excellence is a much bigger issue than the issue of what the printing press is fine, and the proof of that is simply that in 200 years the West has had printing presses and we have not had printing presses according to this suspicion. And we were superior to them. But were the Ottomans really rejecting the printing press on the grounds that they were rejecting science? No, not at all. After 40 years of the invention of the printing press, there was a printing press in Istanbul, but it was a Jewish printing press that printed in Hebrew. Yes, the Ottomans had no problem with their use of the printing press. They allowed 2 Jewish brothers to print Hebrew, but they prevented the printing of Arabic or Ottoman script. I mean, Arabic and Ottoman script, which is written in Arabic script. So why did they prevent the printing of Arabic and Ottoman script? Yes, this is the question. This question brings us into matters that we can say are social, religious, and economic, and are bigger than that. It's not a matter of us wanting to be backward. I mean, there is no one in the world who is keen on the superiority of his country. I mean, you come and tell him, take a suggestion that will benefit you, and he goes and tells you, no, I don't want to. I want to be expensive, and I want to be weak. What's the problem? The problem, firstly, is the fear that these printers might tamper with books of jurisprudence, hadith, and the Holy Quran. The Islamic world has historically received knowledge orally from scholars. So, when you come along and invent a way to write the Holy Quran, you don't yet have the expertise to do it. Most of the printing work is done by Jews or non-Muslim. Decline of knowledge in the Islamic world and the audacity of many ignorant people to speak without knowledge. They didn't receive knowledge from its rightful sources, they took it from books and manuscripts. There was a long-standing principle among scholars: don't take the Quran from a copyist, and don't take knowledge from a journalist. In other words, you can't read the Quran alone, you must read it to a sheikh, peace be upon you. Yes, and until now it is impossible. I am saying it is impossible for anyone to read the Quran correctly from the Mushaf. It is impossible. Of course, it is necessary to have a sheikh, because the sheikh will guide you on the places of nasalization, places of facilitation, places of softening, rules of tajweed. He must hear from you. This is taken orally. It is impossible except to take orally. Even the knowledge of the dream, which is jurisprudence, interpretation, and hadith. I mean, what I really want to tell you is what you see now, a scientific and cultural chaos with journalists, with those who call themselves thinkers, and others. These are people who did not receive knowledge from its people. That is why there is a lot of nonsense, a lot of drivel, and a lot of nonsense, because he read words whose meanings he does not understand, nor do he understand their implications and meanings. So, scholars throughout the Islamic world, up to this moment, do not recognize knowledge except for those who took it from its people because they take it with controls. Well, there are scholars in the Ottoman state who are afraid of the decline of this science. Okay, the idea of books being printed, published, and read by people without anyone correcting them, monitoring their understanding, or resolving linguistic ambiguities was met with strong opposition from scholars and the Ottoman state. Firstly, to preserve the sanctity of knowledge and religion, and secondly, because the Ottoman state had a vast number of scribes. Now, you know, the invention of the printing press is like the invention of the computer or industrial machinery. They say every new invention leads to a decrease in the number of employees. For example, the AI is currently a major issue in politics, business, and economics. AI will cause the extinction of thousands of jobs, things that people used to do for money and support their families. Now, computers and AI can do them with a simple command. So, the economic and social decisions of the Ottoman political leaders, well, I'm not complaining about the shortage of scribes, so I don't need the printing press. Okay, but what about the scribes? They objected to the introduction of the printing press because it would disrupt their livelihoods. Remember, a few years ago in Turkey, for example, when the taxi drivers refused Uber's service and actually went on strike and did all sorts of things until Uber in Turkey was forced to limit its operations to taxis only. I mean, there was a political decision that considered economic and social factors. You can't just introduce an invention that will create a direct economic and social crisis, especially since you don't have a shortage of scribes. The Ottoman Empire had printing presses, yes, but I already had the people who could do it. So, delaying the introduction of the printing press, specifically for Ottoman Arabic and not other languages, was a decision that you could call more socio-economic, taking into account the social and economic conditions of the scribe class. And by the way, later, in 1730, 1928, something similar was permitted, when the Ottoman state allowed a man named Ibrahim Mutafarrikar to introduce a printing press, and books began to be printed in Arabic and Ottoman Turkish. This actually happened. They introduced it in 1927. Some travelers who visited the Ottoman state said that people preferred to buy handwritten books rather than printed ones. Printed books were considered more reliable and more artistically crafted a work of art. You still have people today who appreciate handmade items, things that reflect the artist's touch. Of course, if you look at a book printed around 1700 and these manuscripts are available online, I myself saw the first book by Ibrahim Mutafarrikh. When you look at its appearance and then look at the other book written in Naskh script, there's a huge difference in beauty and elegance. This one is decorated and embellished, showcasing the artistry of the scribe. But what is written in this one? There are still people who love arts and handicrafts, handwoven and handmade items, more than technologically manufactured items, despite all the advancements in modern industry with its precision, ornamentation, and embellishment, and yet you still find these people. So how could it be when industry was still considered inferior to human production? Anyway, Professor Muhammad, I'm sorry, but the whole printing press file during whose reign did it begin and which did it end? If we say the invention happened in 1450, then we were in the reign of Murad Roman II. Okay, who was the father of Mehmed the Conqueror towards the end of his reign? Okay, if it was 1493, which was the first time the Ottoman state allowed the introduction of the printing press, then it was in the reign of Bayezid Roman II, who was the son of Mehmed the Conqueror. Okay, 1727, I think, would be during the reign of Mahmud I, or if memory serves, because he ruled from 1703 to 1730. Okay, as for Mahmud I, or I think God, anyway, what I mean in summary is that it was not a matter that had anything to do with scientific backwardness, nor with rejecting science, nor with stagnation and backwardness. Rather, it was an invention like any other invention. Like when computers entered our country, we faced a problem with the employees who kept records and wrote and so on. Well, but there was a decision from the Ottoman state that printing in Arabic and Ottoman languages was prohibited for fear of distorting science, especially books of hadith and jurisprudence, because even later when they allowed Ibrahim Mutafarrikh, they allowed him to print scientific books, not religious books. So he was still printing books for fear of what? On knowledge, mother, and also out of fear that the Holy Quran might be altered. Yes, there was a fear of this kind. Yes, the Holy Quran and the rest of the books, I mean, the books of hadith, interpretation, jurisprudence and principles and so on. Well, our friend is still sitting with us, watching and waiting, not convinced. Why? He will ask you why that doesn't make sense. Because a state like the Ottoman Empire was originally like this. Administratively, they were clever and bureaucratic, and they knew how to answer any question. Back then, they didn't have cannons. So they brought people from Europe and hired them to build cannons. Then they had cannons. Then they had weapons. They didn't have ships. Then they had ships, and so on. So, you're worried about printing. Bring in people to proofread. Go ahead and proofread. You've dragged us into this whole we need printing thing. Print and proofread. Are you short on people? You have millions of people in the world. Well, that's my argument. I'm a state that has no problem accepting inventions from others and brought in people to build cannons and ships. So, you have to understand that they have no problem bringing in people to build printing presses. So, when I see they haven't done it, I understand their point of view. I mean, right now I have tens of thousands of copyists in Istanbul. Tens of thousands of copyists. Okay, folks, I'm actually as a culturally advanced and prosperous nation. I don't need the printing press. Okay, so why force it into society when it's not receptive to it, whether from the perspective of copyists or even the books themselves? Even after 2 centuries or more, when the books were finally printed, there were no buyers. So why create a crisis within society? Okay, fine. From bands to, and I'll say it again and again, we must also be aware of the true extent of the printing press's influence. The Ottomans remained superior for over 200 years after the invention of the printing press, while the West remained subjugated under the Ottoman Empire for over 200 years, even with the printing press present. So, no one should imagine it's some magical phenomenon that brought about progress, that it appeared in one place and made it progress, or that it disappeared from another and caused it to regress. And you, Professor Muhammad, please consider our situation. We like to take things like this, magnify them, and create a central point or foundation upon which to base everything. From the prohibition to the spread, a whole story is how long it took. I'm telling you, the first look at our history. It's the history of human beings, and our countries are made up of human beings. They have flaws, problems, and calamities. But when we evaluate our history, we evaluate it objectively, so we can identify the real flaws. Where are the real flaws? When we come, someone might say to me, Brother Muhammad, everything you're saying is nonsense. Okay, fine, what's the real point? They might say, your jacket wasn't right. What's that about? If I really do have flaws and mistakes, then focus on those flaws and mistakes, not on saying what I was wearing didn't match the decor. You see, there are suspicions being raised about the Ottoman state, but these are trivial matters, not the things we should actually study to understand our origins and whether they indicate a decline in the Islamic world. Yes, scientifically speaking, that's true, but it's not an indicator of decline. Now, when someone in the Ottoman archives tells you that the archives currently contain 150 million documents, you find that a state has this enormous number of documents, and this is what remains. Certainly, some things have been lost, so you'll find a battalion of scribes, or battalions, no less, whom the Sultan might deem unnecessary. But why do I need a printing press then? I had people working on this, but the justification wasn't this, it was their fear of distortion. Yes, their fear of distortion. But what does that mean? Why should I deal with an invention that will cause me religious, economic, and social problems? Or is there no need for it? And if it comes along, it will cause problems. Okay, in its context, in its time, do you think it was logical? Yes, it was logical, yes, and I don't mind if you say it was a mistake. I mean, I don't mind if you say it was a wrong decision. But what was its magnitude? Nothing compared to the superiority of the Ottoman Empire. Yes, of course. I mean, in some countries today, you see a traffic policeman standing in the street, but in our countries, in some Arab countries, you find the police everywhere, holding radars and so on. So, I say to them, why don't you get the technology from country X, from the Europeans who are superior to us today, and put it in your country? Or do you want to remain backward? And I take this file, the file of this type of technology, and I say to you, I'm sorry, you are backward, declining nations because of this story. If I were to measure, for example, well, since the printing press or the printing press file isn't a primary and fundamental reason for studying every file, how did this empire transform from something everyone feared to the sick man of Europe? How did the story of weakness begin? What are the real reasons? Okay, let's pray for the Prophet, peace be upon him. Look, first, I must mention this matter, my dear people. It is one of the laws of God Almighty that days are fleeting, and everything has its lifespan. So, no nation is immortal. We study the reasons for weakness. I said before that history for nations is like medicine. Has medical science been able to guarantee immortality for anyone? Has anyone ever been immortal? No matter how much we advance medically. No. Does that mean we should shut down the science of medicine and say, we're all going to die and medicine hasn't done anything for us? No, we try through medicine to understand people's illnesses. We try to treat them as best we can. Even if we don't know how, we treat it by trying to make the patient's final days comfortable instead of suffering pain and agony. Similarly, the study of history in relation to nations nations is an attempt to understand the ills of nations, to learn how to treat these ills, how to prolong the life of the nation if possible, and at least to hasten the emergence of a replacement, if there is one. So, what I mean is, we must understand that ultimately, all nations, all states, all civilizations are destined to fall. This is a divine law. In this universe, the Ottomans, like all the states before them and all the states after them, will reach their end. So, what makes us, while studying the patient's condition and diagnosing the state of the Ottoman Empire, think this way? I don't want anyone to stand before the Ottoman Empire and say, oh, if only they had done this, if only they hadn't done that. We must understand that there are lifespans for everything. So, if we consider ourselves doctors in relation to nations and try to diagnose, you'll find historians like Willie Durant, Edward Shepard Creasy, Esposito, and others who are amazed by the Ottoman Empire's longevity and how its vitality almost defied the laws of nations. The Ottoman Empire lived for 6 centuries, as we said, and this is rare in the life of empires. Yes, it is rare in the life of empires. Therefore, people try to understand how it lived for this period, not how it died. The Ottoman Empire, as I said, was a state that terrified Europe. John Esposito called it the executioner of Europe. He quotes a historian. So, we must. Its fall was slow. Its fall was slow and long. Harry Hazard says in his book, The History of Islam, that from this moment the Ottoman state began its long, slow, almost imperceptible journey of decline. Yes, no one. And some foreign ambassadors who were not present in the Ottoman state were saying that this state, I mean, what I want to say, defied the laws of time. It was very long and seemed endless. Some foreign observers who were present here said, and therefore, Sheikh Murad, what can we say? That our Ottoman state truly fulfilled its historical duty in a different way. The proof of this is that the Ottoman state eliminated all the enemies it faced and all the enemies that were its contemporaries, and those who eliminated the Ottoman state were those who were born after its time of strength. Only enemy, the only enemy that existed before the Ottoman state and remained conciliatory towards it, was the French. I mean, for example, the Ottoman state emerged into a world where who was? There were the Byzantines, the Venetians, the Genoese, the Hungarians, and the Austrians. All of them collapsed, yet the Ottoman Empire remained. While the Ottoman Empire was still standing, European powers emerged and also collapsed. For example, the Safavids emerged and collapsed, yet the Ottoman Empire remained. The Spanish and the Portuguese emerged and collapsed, yet the Ottoman Empire remained. I'll even mention the French, the Russians, the English, the French, and I'll circle the French. They were the ones who brought down the Ottoman Empire. These are the people who emerged after the Ottoman Empire had reached its peak and begun its decline. That's when this new power appeared. The French were the only ones who were at peace with the Ottoman Empire. So, during the decline, from which sultan to which sultan, I'll tell you now, but I want to emphasize this point. If you're talking about the Ottoman Empire, it fulfilled its duty perfectly, because it protected the Islamic world during a period when no other state existed in the Islamic world that could undertake this responsibility. So, when we talked about your question, which is when it began, we said that when we divide the Ottoman Empire, we can say that 1683 is the moment the decline began. From 1683, we said this was during the reign of Sultan Mehmed Roman IV, which was the failure of the last siege of Vienna, until the year 1000, the fall. 1924 is the fall. We said we'd take a bit in the middle, which is the French campaign in 1798 during the reign of Sultan Selim Roman III. We can say that the decline was slow, but after Selim Roman III it started to be a little faster. Yes, okay. So you're talking about from 1683 to 1798. You're talking about 125 years. Yes, that's their decline, which is almost palpable. And from Selim, which is 1798 to 1724, let's talk about how many years that is. Take the whole century, so 125 years again, or approximately. The first stage of decline means it's closer to strength than weakness, or you can't classify it that way. Yes, it's close. Look at the Ottoman Empire. It continued fighting and retreating until the end of its reign. I mean, many, perhaps most, books that talk about the Ottoman Empire begin the moment of weakness and collapse after Suleiman the Magnificent. They say that after Suleiman the Magnificent, who died in 1566, until 1683, this period is one of decline and collapse. I actually disagree with this statement. Or let me say I disagree partially and agree partially. This period might have had internal problems. Sultans, grand viziers, ministers, harem issues, janissary problems, but ultimately the state was feared and strong in the eyes of the people and always capable of, and that's why some historians take this the period as evidence of the strength of Ottoman institutions, shows that even when weak figures appeared in government, this did not have a direct negative impact on what the state, meaning the state, despite its weak sultans, was stronger than all the European powers and capable of defeating them, because even after the time of Suleiman the Magnificent, important conquests took place, including the conquest of Cyprus and Crete, and of course the preservation of the Ottoman state's presence in Central Europe, and other victories against the Safavids, the recapture of Baghdad and Eastern Anatolia from the Safavids, and resistance to Russian expansion. All of this happened after the time of the powerful sultans, the last of whom was Suleiman the Magnificent. Yes, and then when you compare your current situation to the peak, you are doing yourself an injustice. Exactly. Yes, if I wanted to prove the 2 points, we said that it is in the nature of states to die, then in the case of the Ottoman state fulfilled its historical duty in the best possible way. The amazing thing about the Ottoman state is its longevity, not its eventual demise. Now, when we ask about the reasons for weakness, yes, we mentioned 3 reasons for weakness before, but we won't elaborate further. We'll briefly mention those we spoke about who were excessively tolerant. This excessive tolerance created problems, allowing people with weak loyalty to enter the palace. This excessive tolerance, coupled with a lack of Arabization, meant that the Ottoman presence, particularly in Central Europe, was superficial and not deeply rooted. Consequently, it left behind simmering nationalisms. When Western support arrived, these nationalisms began to pose profound problems for the Ottoman state. Incidentally, I should also mention that many countries and peoples converted to Islam but did not become Arabized. The entire eastern wing of the Islamic world converted but did not become Arabized, yet they did not turn against Islam as the Balkan and Central European countries did, primarily because they lacked Western support. Nevertheless, we must acknowledge that in the Balkans, Ottomans, countries like Bosnia, Kosovo, and Albania have maintained their Islamic identity despite the Western and communist periods and contemporary Western hegemony. Ottoman presence, I can't say it, completely ended. Even now, if you go to the Balkans, the mosques are Ottoman, the imams, the style of the imams, the rituals and ceremonies, the endowments and the like, all Ottoman. Okay, so we talked about the issue of excessive tolerance, the issue of not Arabizing, and the issue of the executive body, or the executive authority encroaching on the scholarly body. We talked about all of that. No, let's not dwell on it. There's a fourth reason, for example, the Janissaries. The Janissaries, and this is a problem that exists in most countries, Abu al-Harith. Yes, military, the fighting force, is a problem, as it appeared in the Abbasid state, the Mamluk state, and others. Now, when the Ottoman state began, it began with an elite, meaning the people surrounding Osman, this elite. This elite called people to jihad, but they were originally civilians. Yes, they fought, but in the end, for example, if the conquest ended, they would return to their lands, they would return to their fiefdoms. Their locations are their cities, but the state, in its expansion phase, always needs a professional army, an army that can be deployed at any moment. This professional element represents the backbone of the state, its strongest component. Even now, in our contemporary era, the issue of civil-military relations remains unresolved. Anyone studying political science and civil-military relations knows that this is one of the dilemmas facing states: how to subject the military to the will of the people or the civilian government. It remains a problem, and even the notion that the West has solved it is incorrect. But that's another topic we won't delve into now. The point is that the military is highly effective under two conditions: a strong ruler and a continuous jihad movement. As long as there is jihad, there is a strong ruler. These groups draw their best from them. When the ruler weakens, politics begins. The state tended towards contraction and pacifism, and there was no longer any jihad. Corruption began to spread to this military class. Yes, that's why you find them entering the political arena, controlling ministers or grand viziers, and perhaps even rebelling against the sultans themselves. For example, you'll find that the Janissaries, from the late reign of, we could say, of Yazid Roman II, and even from the late reign of Mehmed the Conqueror, began to show their interference in politics. Or perhaps it was because the first Grand Vizier was killed by the Janissaries. As far as I remember, the last Grand Vizier during the time of Mehmed the Conqueror was named Muhammad al-Karamanli. Muhammad Pasha al-Karamanli, who, as we mentioned, wrote a treatise in Arabic about the sultans of the Ottoman state. This man wanted Prince Sem, while they wanted Yazid Roman II. Anyway, they killed him and installed Yazid Roman II. So this was their first interference. Yes, and then their evil intensified. There were attempts to rebel against Suleiman the Magnificent, but he had a strong personality and suppressed them. But later, with the sultans who were unable to rule, or who were weak, meaning they killed one of them, like Sultan Osman Roman II, also known as Osman the Young, whom they strangled and killed. They also killed Sultan Ibrahim I and deposed other sultans. There were also internal conflicts during the reign of Murad Roman IV, but Murad Roman IV was a strong figure, so he suppressed and subdued the Janissaries. In general, they transformed from the state's power, its striking arm, and its feared invincible army until corruption began to spread and problems started to surface within the state itself. They began to have opinions, interventions, and rebellions. Eventually, they reached a state similar to that of some Arab armies today, but I'm being unfair to them by comparing them to the Janissaries. The situation now is worse. The army, due to its corruption, is incapable of defeating European armies and has begun to suffer defeats. However, as a military force present in the country, it is causing and instigating problems within the country itself. Thus, the state's power has become against it, not for its benefit. This is the army, the great Janissary Corps, which had begun to show signs of weakness, reached its end with Sultan Mahmud Roman II. Yes, Sultan Mahmud Roman II came here in 1826 and eliminated the Janissaries. He eliminated them, meaning he slaughtered them. He killed them. Yes, he killed them. Yes, he killed them. I mean, he beheaded 1,000 of them, and he created another army in the European style. Yes, that's right. And this became the new Ottoman army, or the modern army. Okay, so, was Mahmud Roman II wrong? Were the Janissaries wrong? We can get to the details later, but what I mean is, what should I say? This large army, when it started suffering many defeats and became unable to stand against the European armies, began to lose all its importance. They were just busy thugging and causing trouble within the state. So, you mean, they weren't winning. They were just causing trouble within the state. Go away. You're a mess. That's why I am going to tell you about the soldiers in the Arab countries. You won't find a single Arab army now that's capable of winning, and they don't even fight. Yet they take most of the state's money, they loot most of the state's money, and they have privileges in housing, clubs, restaurants, and schools. They have privileges, and they don't do anything. And in the end, they rule. You know what Amal Dunkwall meant when he said that the armies you see. Amal Dunkwall. Yes, but this poem was in its place. Yes, well, that's one of the reasons why the state's strength. But the whole story of the Janissaries is, don't you think that the great Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror was wrong to honor them like that at first when he triumphed and conquered Constantinople, I think, or rather, look, he gave them a token of appreciation, and they misunderstood the meaning of that token. It later turned into tribute, right? You're a ruler, a mere image of a sultan. Come on, honor us. Where's our token of appreciation? We won't even lift a finger for you. Look at this. What is this? This same phenomenon existed in the Abbasid Caliphate during the time of Turkish military control. They did the same thing. Yes, weren't they the first to kill Caliph al-Mutawakkil? And then they ruled during the time known as the Caliphate, and after al-Mutawakkil, they killed al-Muntasir Billah, and then they killed al-Mustin, and then they killed al-Mutadi. And the reason was what? Al-Mardi Billah. What is this? Control and gifts. Control and gifts. And in the Abbasid Caliphate, you had names like Bugha the Younger, Bugha the Elder, and Wasif. Look, human affairs in general are not without flaws. Every policy you devise has advantages and side effects. These side effects it remains suppressed and unseen during times of strength. But as soon as we reach times of weakness, these side effects begin to grow and intensify. It's like when we talked about medicine, for example. For humans, everyone takes medicine, even though all medicines have side effects. But when a person gets older and reaches 80 or 90, for instance, you'll find that these side effects become more pronounced and manifest in other illnesses and other bodily systems. This is the nature of human beings and the nature of human systems. Remember when we were also talking about the beginnings of the Umayyad state and said that the system of succession itself, the system of succession and inheritance of power, had one of its most important advantages: it protected the nation from fighting over power. When each sultan died, people were already convinced that the sultan would remain in that family, and this led to stability. The advantage of this system is at the beginning of the state and during its strength, but this same system is what leads to power falling into the hands of those who don't deserve it. The people of the palaces, the people who grew up in, on the other hand, in times of prosperity, the same thing that sustained the state in its early stages is what led to its collapse in the end. Yes, indeed. And So it is with all policies. Yes, let me give you another example of the reasons for the fall of the Ottoman state in this manner: the issue of foreign privileges. Yes, what is the issue of foreign privileges? Now, let's talk about the time of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. We were talking about him in a previous episode. We were saying that Suleiman the Magnificent was surprised, or rather, events accelerated during his reign to the point that he found himself facing a descendant of the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V. Charles was almost uniting all of Europe under his rule. He was a descendant of the Spanish monarchs on his mother's side and a descendant of the Holy Roman Empire on his father's side. Yes, so this man who was going to unite all of Europe under him had no enemies except France and Italy, but Italy's influence at that time was end in the battles of Central Europe. So, Suleiman the Magnificent established a strong diplomatic relationship with France, and of course, the French also needed the relationship with Suleiman the Magnificent, because he was originally Francis I, the King of France, when he fought Charles V, was captured and defeated. Imagine, the King of France himself was a prisoner of the Spanish. One of the aspects of the alliance established by Suleiman the Magnificent was that he needed France, primarily its coasts, for naval supplies. Of course, we have Khar ad-Din Barbarossa fighting the Spanish fleet in the Mediterranean, and they needed France to rescue the Andalusians. They also needed France to break up this European bloc. He granted them foreign privileges. What do foreign privileges mean? French merchants were exempt from taxes and could trade without problems. French subjects in the Ottoman Empire received special treatment. If two people had a dispute, they would resolve it in front of the French consul. Yes, this is how these French privileges were during the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. Saying, I want foreign privileges. The Italian comes and says, I want foreign privileges. The Austrian comes and says, I want privileges like the French. So what happened after the Russian wins, for example, or says, I want privileges? Meaning that the Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman state come under my protection. So what is this an attack on? Regarding sovereignty, he is not talking about the Christian Russians now, yes? And the French are talking about protecting the Catholics. Yes, so the same thing is foreign privileges. Just as they were a weapon in the hands of the state during its strength, they became a weapon, a loophole, and a point of weakness for the state during its weakness. Yes. For example, the issue of foreign privileges is one of the most serious matters that paved the way for the penetration of the Ottoman state. Yes, and it stirred up the minorities within it. Of course, these minorities were stirred up religiously and nationally, and you find that the consuls were present, meaning they controlled a lot. And it even led to the collapse of the Ottoman economy. Why? Because when you say that France has some products and you tell them to come and trade here without taxes on those French products, what does that mean? It's just like the Ottoman products. So it's not our big problem. It won't compete with us. But when Europe progresses and has an industrial revolution and produces higher quality goods at a lower cost, and these goods enter the Ottoman Sultanate without being taxed, what happens? Ottoman industry collapsed because the Ottoman product became of lower quality and higher price. So what was the purpose of the foreign privileges? Due to an internal economic collapse. For example, in our time, there is a lot of commotion. Every day you wake up to find Trump making a statement about China, saying that China has penetrated us economically, that I will impose tariffs on China, and that I will reach a trade agreement with China. Why all this? Because China has reached a stage within the current capitalist economic cycle where it is capable of manufacturing a vast number of products at a price and quality superior to American products if they were to enter the American market. For him, this is an indicator of the collapse of American industries, even though the companies operating in China are originally American companies. But this is how the global capitalist economic cycle has created cheap labor and cheap infrastructure in China. There are no workers' rights or anything like that. We exploit people like it's normal. So, many capitalists seeking higher profits went to China. When this impacted the Americans, there was a crisis. Something similar happened in the Ottoman Empire. Foreign privileges, unforeseen by anyone, led over time to the collapse of the Ottoman economy in the face of new European goods. Yes, for example, one of the things that led to the weakening of the Ottoman Empire was that the later sultans of the Ottoman Empire turned to westernization and imitating the West. May God forgive them. He forgives them, but what's the rule we have? Ibn Khaldun's famous principle states that the vanquished are always eager to imitate the victor. Indeed, whenever you begin to suffer military defeats and others start to overcome you, the question arises why? Did they triumph and why were we defeated? There are always two answers to this question. The first answer is that we deviated from our former path, and the second is that we were not as advanced as they were. These two answers are sometimes called the answer of authenticity and modernity. The question is, was the problem our deviation? We were on the right path and then strayed, leading to our defeat, or were we completely lost and unable to catch up with our adversary, who ultimately triumphed over us? This answer always determines the path to reform. Unfortunately, the Ottoman sultans, starting with Selim Roman III and continuing onward, believed, or rather, their practical policy was that we needed to emulate the West in its institutions and methods. Therefore, from the reign of Selim Roman III onward, the use of European military experts led to the establishment of military schools in the European style. Yes, let's move on a bit. After Selim, we find, for example, to Europe, he brought back and adopted the European Ottoman administrative system and replaced the Ottoman administrative system with it. He then began attempts, like abolishing endowments and changing the existing system to make it compatible with the European system, to the point that he took off the robe and wore a suit. Oh, and he took off the turban and wore the fez. No, I have to tell you, the fez also disappeared. After a while, the fez became a symbol of Ottomanism. A nice cap was found. Didn't you notice that the fez in Marmad Roman II was a symbol of progress? Yes, by God. Yes, in Marmad Roman II we took off the turban and wore the fez. Yes, but in Ataturk's time, the fez became an Ottoman symbol and a symbol of backwardness, and the hat became the symbol of progress. The fez disappeared and the tarbush came. Laughs, as one says. Well, I mean, our original custom is to wear the turban, not the fez. Even when you look at pictures of the Ottoman sultans, like Marmad Roman II, you'll find he's the first one without a turban, wearing a suit. Yes, the one before him was Mustafa Riza, and he wore a turban and a robe. Well, the prestige of our turban is something else. Laughs, you're entering a state of alienation now, either because you want to be like the one who conquered you, because even Ibn Khaldun says that the defeated soul believes in the perfection of the one who conquered it. Yes, indeed. So, was it Selim Roman III or Marmad? Then came Abul-Majid I after Marmad Roman II, and Abul-Majid I issued a constitution with an Islamic preamble stating that Islam is the official religion of the state and Arabic is the official language. Its preamble is Islamic, but its laws are secular. He removed and discarded the rulings of Sharia and brought in French, Italian, and English laws. Yes, that Abul-Majid, who is his name is Hatay Humayun Gulhain. These people never won. They never won anything. From the moment they changed and turned to westernization, they never won. I mean, Selim Roman III, it was during his reign that the French campaign came to Egypt and he couldn't repel it except with an Anglo-Russian alliance. And Marmad Roman II, he was defeated and surrendered. Of course, there was first Muhammad Ali Pasha defeated him, and he stopped until Kutahir, which means he was threatened in Istanbul and lost his fleet. even in the famous Battle of Navarino in Greece. The same thing happened with Abdülmecid. A series of defeats continued and the Ottoman state never won. This is also a sixth reason, which is the repeated defeats. What repeated defeats? I'm telling you, this is evidence that resorting to Westernization was not an effective solution. Rather, the Ottoman state was defeated and the defeats continued. But here, the alienated person doesn't examine himself. I mean, now you have, for example, a Janissary army, so your thinking is, we were defeated because our army is old-fashioned. The old ways didn't work and the modern methods weren't enough to get rid of the Janissaries. A modern army was defeated too. Don't think that we were defeated because we embraced Westernization. Don't think that it was because there wasn't better training, better weaponry, or anything else. You're not discussing the path forward. You're discussing the details and procedures. Yes. For example, resorting to Westernization was one of the factors that led to the rapid collapse of the Ottoman Empire, because as long as you're defeated, the victorious state imposes conditions on you, and the conditions imposed by the victorious state are inherently harsh in the long run. Of course, they're harsh in the short term, whether it's taking money or land, but then the West comes and tells you, we want democracy, we want to improve the conditions of the people, improve the conditions of minorities, we want a parliament. The parliament that the Europeans want, do they really want it for the benefit of the Ottoman state, so that it would have a consultative council and get rid of autocratic rule? Most of them are already monarchies, and they don't actually want them because they are a means of inciting nationalism and tribalism and a gateway to calls for independence and secession. So, for example, you'll find that Britain occupied Egypt. Yes, and before Britain occupied Egypt, there was a parliament. Yes, fine, then they abolished the parliament, and Egypt remained without. Then it had negative effects, so he abolished the parliament. They saw it as the Red Sultan, the dictator who didn't have a parliament, and the people who were influenced by it, who followed it, and who were deceived by it, also talked about the necessity of a parliament, and that Abul Hamid was in control of the reins of power, and that there was corruption in the Ottoman state, and that this corruption needed to be monitored by a parliament, and so on. As for the West, when you're going to imitate the West itself doesn't allow you to imitate it in the things that could lead to your victory are using tools that lead to further weakness and defeat within the Ottoman state. Of course, the presence of the West and this imitation of the West led to direct Western support for nationalisms, and this was one of the major problems in the Ottoman state. These nationalisms sparked secessions. The second thing is that Westernization combined with the flaw we mentioned earlier. The Ottoman state was a centralized and dominant state, and it eliminated the forces of a vibrant society and the balance that the Islamic system had created. When a large, centralized state embraces Westernization, you find that no alternatives can emerge to support the Ottoman state or succeed it if it falls. You know, when you put all your eggs in one basket and that basket falls out, that's it. The only remaining power in the Islamic State is a power influenced by Westernization. Yes, that's right. So, this is also one of the most important reasons that led to the weakness of the Ottoman state. I must also say that it is one of the reasons that led to the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, and the resilience of the West are something to admire. We mentioned before the hadith narrated from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Although its chain of transmission is weak, it is historically accurate. As for Persia, it will be defeated once or twice, then there will be no more Persia. As for the Romans, They will triumph over generations. Whenever one generation perishes, another will rise, and they will be your companions until the day of judgment. Despite the successive defeats of the West at the hands of the Ottomans, they did not despair. They kept trying and trying until they produced the forces that would be able to take revenge on the Ottoman Empire. Indeed, the West produced a large number of heroes and strong figures who fought and struggled and were able to become, at crucial moments, formidable forces that would ultimately weaken the Ottoman Empire. Professor Muhammad also mentions that the length of the wars, the Ottoman Empire's wars with Austria, Iran, or the Safavid state, was one of the most important reasons for its weakness and decline. I am among those who reject this. I believe that the policies of peace, retreat, and withdrawal are what led to the weakness of nations. We said earlier that military forces, if they don't find an outlet, will turn internally. Of course, I know many people have said this, but I want to say that, in my estimation, the Islamic perspective and the view of the laws of the universe indicate that it's not jihad that leads to exhaustion, but rather the lack of jihad and the shrinking of the state. The lack of jihad is what leads to the shrinking of the state, because during the periods of peace that the Ottoman state experienced, when it later wanted to wage war, it was surprised to find that its army was no longer organized and that its fleet was being defeated. What does fighting even mean? Yes, this was a problem, but of course, another reason for the weakness of the Ottoman state, which we should never forget, is the Safavid state. In truth, you can call the Safavid state one of the curses of history if you trace the dates of the Safavid-Ottoman wars. And I put this list and put the dates of the Ottoman-European wars alongside it. You will find that the Safavid state saved Europe at a critical moment. A Safavid state saved Europe. The Safavid state saved Europe. The Ottomans often had to withdraw their armies after a strong victory, that temporary victory that needed consolidation, or accept an unsuitable treaty that required more patience. This was due to a crisis created by the Safavid state in Iraq, the Gulf, and Eastern Anatolia. For example, there was the 30 Years' War, which devastated Europe from 1618 to 1648. This war was a prime opportunity for the Ottoman Empire to expand, but the Safavids evaded Iraq and Baghdad. I want to say from the beginning, look at Selim. Look at Selim. 8 years. What brought Selim east? It was a Safavid state. He was forced to come and fight the Safavid state, then fight the Mamluk state, and then return. Yes, 8 years of Selim's rule, and he was undefeated. Imagine if a person with that kind of energy and strength had exhausted himself. On the European side, you imagine that if he hadn't conquered us, he would have left Suleiman the Magnificent's son in Vienna. Then, Suleiman the Magnificent might have gone to Paris. Yes, with the strength of Suleiman the Magnificent and the strength of Selim. But the Safavids withdrew this Ottoman power, thus exhausting all of Selim's efforts. All 8 years of Selim's time were spent dealing with the problems that arose in the Safavid state. Right now, Suleiman the Magnificent, we said he launched 13 campaigns, 3 of them in Iran and 3 against the Safavids. Imagine if Suleiman the Magnificent had secured his rear, meaning he had strategic depth, as the military group calls it, and had exhausted his efforts on the European front. he wouldn't have had to return or go anywhere. We would have imagined that he would have finished us off long ago. And finishing us off means the emperor, the center of European power, which after that meant you only had Spain and France. And by the way, the Safavid state's effects are still felt today. Even now, the conflict between Shiites and Sunnis is rooted in the Safavid state, because the Safavid state is what made this region, the Iranian region, Shiite. It revived it after a period of decline, decay, and near extinction. Of course, the Shiite sect didn't disappear entirely. It existed as a minority within the Islamic state, but it became a powerful, armed empire, inheriting an enmity that we still suffer from now, 500 years later. In reality, the Safavid state, in addition to its alliances with Portugal and sometimes with Russia, and even its daughter, the Asharid state, managed to overcome the Ottomans somewhat. It took time, even though its lifespan was short, but it also drained the state. Yes, Nader Shah came after him. So, I want to tell you, this state was truly one of the... Yes, it needs a whole episode. If you look at it from the perspective of the Ottoman state or from the perspective of the Muslim world in general, this state was a reason why the Muslim world was so very strong. It's amazing how something like this always comes up to grab your attention. Laura, you have to find something to throw you off balance. Another reason for the weakness of the Ottoman Empire was the existence of internal rebellions. Of course, the most important and powerful of these rebellions was that of Muhammad Ali Pasha in Egypt, and before him, the rebellion of Zahir al-Umar and Fakhr al-Din al-Marni al-Barzi in the Levant. And of course, there were the Greek, Bulgarian, and Serbian rebellions. Undoubtedly, the Wahhabi movement was also, from the Ottoman perspective, considered one of the movements that weakened the Ottoman Empire. But it's said that Abd al-Wahhab initiated a reform movement in this Arabian Peninsula at that time, religiously and morally, because the region had declined somewhat. And look, this is a very complex issue. This is a very complex issue, and to be honest, I need to research it independently, and I haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. But what I can say now is that if you look at it from the Wahhabi perspective, you will see that they have a very strong logic in their reform movement, although some people say even the term itself. We don't mean Wahhabis. This was coined by the opponents. I'm speaking historically now, not in a Salafist or doctrinal context. I'm speaking historically. It will be called the Wahhabi movement, just as its Saudi state. This is history. I mean, setting aside the details of the doctrine itself. Yes, the Wahhabi movement, from the Wahhabi perspective or from the perspective of the people of the Arabian Peninsula, arose in a region where the Ottoman state was weak. It resisted the manifestations of polytheism that existed, such as supplication to saints, stones, trees, and so on. These things are mentioned in Wahhabi books, but I don't know if they are mentioned in other sources. These manifestations of polytheism in the Arabian Peninsula need research. I don't know if I'm right or wrong now because I haven't done it. But I'm certain I'm speaking historically now, that the expansion of the Wahhabi movement and what it did in the Levant, in Iraq, and in the Hijaz, they fought people as they fought infidels, not as innovators. This is something found in the fatwas of the Najdi scholars of the Dawah movement and in the histories of Ibn Ghanam and Ibn Bishr. It's not something we're just saying, and it's certain that from the Ottoman perspective, this was a stab in the back. There's no question about it. The Ottoman state, and we're talking about the Wahhabi movement, now began in the mid-16th century, around the year 1700. That's 1700. Around 1774, the Ottoman state paid war reparations to Russia for the first time, due to the Treaty of Vienna. So, what I'm trying to say is, at a time when the Ottoman state state couldn't afford a stab in the back in its most vulnerable moments. The Wahhabi movement emerged. If you were living in Istanbul and observing what the Ottoman state was doing with the Russians, the British, the French, the Austrians, the Bulgarians, and the Hungarians, you would certainly see this movement. It was anti-treacherous reform movement. At least a treacherous one, and it may be connected to foreigners. Of course, the Ottoman Turks are still convinced that this movement is part of an English conspiracy, and this is not true. I mean, it is certain that this is not true. Yes, but what I want to say is, as long as you are sitting in Istanbul and looking at it from the point of view of the Ottoman state, you will easily believe that this movement was what? Yes, it was a foreign conspiracy, but history isn't a literal picture. It's not about pure good and pure evil. It has details. When we talked about the Westernization movement and people's conviction in it, and how we started blindly imitating it, the Young Turks, the Kemalists, and others emerged. Have we reached that point yet? I want to say that everything I've said, Sheikh Abu al-Harith, leads us to stages of weakness that resulted in defeats against Western countries. So, let's take a lesson from those defeats: Westernization, the spread of nationalist ideas, the Turkish missions that went to study in the West, and the presence of Western trainers and military personnel who came to teach in Ottoman military academies. This is where a military class emerged within Turkey, a military class that believed in Western ideas, and one of the most important aspects of their belief in Western ideas is that they, the military, are the guardians of the state. The West only rescued itself from weakness when it became nationalist, when it became a nation-state. Nationalism, for example, most people, I mean, the class that formed during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid, the military class. If you study the curricula they studied and the professors who taught them, you will find that a large number of them were German and were influenced by the German experience. So what is the German experience? It is the experience of the state, established by Bismarck, the military leader who unified these regions and carried out a coup. Consequently, the military came to see themselves as responsible for defending the state and ensuring its security. If the Sultan deviated, they had the right, indeed the national duty, to overthrow him to correct the course of the state. Therefore, those whom Abdul Hamid raised as military personnel were the same military personnel who later overthrew him, driven by Europe and the military culture of the German experience, which instilled in them this concept of reform and unification. Yes, and that is why, after Abdul Hamid, Turkey began the Young Turk movement and the Committee of Union and Progress. They began trying to Turkify the administration in the Arab countries, and this led us into another crisis. We said there was a crisis in the past called the lack of Arabization, and now we have a crisis called the Turkification crisis because the documents of the Levant and Egypt were not written in Turkish, they were written in Arabic. The Ottoman state in Egypt did not operate in Turkish, which is the Ottoman language, but rather in Arabic. So this is where Turkification began. And of course, the Arab world, on the other hand, was also controlled by foreign powers. You have France, which occupied Algeria in 1830 and Tunisia in 1881. Britain occupied Cyprus in occupation, as you can see in detail, and then occupied Egypt in 1882. And then you have the Russians expanding from the north, from the northeast and northwest, meaning they are entering the Balkans, and Bulgaria and entering the Caucasus. Yes, and of course, the Russians are also nationalists. This is the nationalist situation. We said that the deep foreign presence in the Levant dating back to the days of foreign privileges and French, Russian, and British penetration. All of this fostered a belief in the idea of nationalism, even within the Arab countries. Yes, so the idea emerged among the Arabs that we should also be Arabs and have our own independent and distinct nationality. Yes, this wasn't a general demand, but those who expressed it, whether they were deceived or were subservient to the British, gained influence. Now, when you're an occupying power and you see someone expressing your opinion, whether you actually fund them and they're one of your own, or someone who's genuinely convinced of the idea and not funded by you, you allow them to speak. So this nationalist idea emerged and clashed with the Turkish nationalist movement at the beginning of World War I. This led to the emergence of a movement like the so-called Great Arab Revolt led by Sharif Hussein in the Hejaz. Consequently, the Ottoman Empire, in its final days, found itself besieged by a number of the disadvantages include the national situation, the intellectual situation, and the new military situation. And I mustn't forget, and we must mention, of course, that one of the important reasons is Western technological superiority. Western technological superiority, you know, and we might elaborate on this issue when we come, God willing, to the period of colonialism. You know, when the West develops a weapon, this weapon doesn't just enable them to win a battle. No, this weapon enables them to win a battle first, and second, it enables them to control other resources. So, money that was coming to you goes to this Westerner.
بريطانيا لما راحت احتلت الهند ولا لما راحت احتلت مصر، هي مش بس احتلت مصر واحتلت الهند وخدت فلوسهم، لا ده هي منعت مصر والهند من أن تتطور.
And with this weapon, they prevent your progress and your superiority. Okay, so now, when Britain went and occupied India, or when it went and occupied Egypt, yes, it didn't just occupy Egypt and India and take their money, but it prevented Egypt and India from developing into industry. They would always be suppliers of grain and food. So, this weapon wins a battle, but then what does it do? It becomes a barrier to progress. You can't progress. And of course, the money that used to go to you now goes to the foreigner who uses it to strengthen himself. These things created this situation. Their decision to enter the First World War may have been a fatal mistake. The majority of historians agree that it was a fatal mistake. But I read, for example, about Shakib Arslan, who was close to the men of the Ottoman state, and he is a man who is not accused of anything in religion or in integrity, that the Ottomans were informed with certainty that if this war ended, an agreement would be reached to divide the Ottoman state between the victors. Now, this war was between parties that were all enemies of the Ottoman state. So you have Britain, France, and
يعني أو صربيا في ذلك الوقت وإيطاليا كانت مع الأولانيين.
Italy was with the first two. Now, supposedly, you have enmity with all countries except Germany. Yes.
الخطر كان من العداوة التي
But the danger was from the enmity
إنجلترا وفرنسا. ليه؟
represented by Russia, England, and France. Why? Because these countries are the closest to the borders and they are the ones who actually occupy Ottoman lands. Well, the Ottomans, as Shakib Arslan mentioned, tried to reach agreements with the Allied powers. Agreements that would preserve the borders of the Ottoman state. Why didn't they agree to an agreement before the war? Or even at the beginning of the war, it became clear to them that there was a plan to divide the Ottoman state among the victors after them. Since the Ottomans had a negative history with Germany and saw Germany as a potential obstacle to the European alliance, the Ottoman alliance with Germany and their entry into the war on its side led them to hope that if they won, the British, Russian, and French occupations would be lifted from Ottoman lands. That's why they entered the war, and I tend to agree with this. Generally speaking, what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't rush to accuse politicians of naivety at crucial moments. This accusation of naivety requires careful consideration before passing judgment, because it's difficult for someone who was part of an organization to lead a revolution and manage a state, even if they made mistakes and even if they weren't okay. But throwing it around with naivety, you have to be careful. Yes, it's not easy. Yes, you say, for example, a weak country that was at war and could have avoided the war, but went ahead and entered it because it admired the Germans, or because of who liked whom, or because who deceived whom. You don't understand politics. Yes, okay, Professor Muhammad, let's say these are the major general reasons. Of course, there are many important secondary reasons. Yes, we can't apply them in this episode. Yes, because of course, we're trying to close the whole arc related to the Ottoman state because we're now approaching the question of sources and references. Yes, until we reached the Republic. Yes, what's left for us to reach the Republic? Look, I'll tell you, it's as if you want to summarize this period of weakness. So, if we close the arc, okay, the point I'm going to make this won't appeal to specialists. I'm saying this to make things easier. No, stay with us. For those of us who aren't specialists, if you want to summarize this period of weakness in a simple way, put Abdul Hamid Roman II in the middle, use him as a benchmark and say before Abdul Hamid, and after Abdul Hamid. Yes, before Abdul Hamid. You could say that the Ottoman Empire lost everything it had conquered and maintained during the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent and those who came after him. Under Abdul Hamid, the Ottoman Empire lost everything it had conquered and maintained during the reign of Selim I and those who came after him, except for the Arab East, meaning except for the Levant and the Hejaz. After Abdul Hamid, who is considered the last effective sultan, the Ottoman Empire lost everything except the heart of Anatolia. Even Istanbul, Izmir, and Eastern Anatolia were all occupied after World War I. Yes, this is the heart of Anatolia, this small area that was mentioned in the travel guide. This is what Mustafa Kemal Ataturk came to and fought for, or struggled for, or whatever you want to call it, until he brought it to modern Turkey. This is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's achievement. Yes, that's the difference between the lands of the Treaty of Seven, which is the heart of Anatolia, and the treaties of Lausanne. This is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk's achievement. Yes, and of course, it's greatly exaggerated based on the idea that he's the founder of modern Turkey. But if you're comparing this to Abdul Hamid, then of course not. Mustafa Kemal, the Turk, told you, we won this part. Iraq isn't ours and we don't want it. The Levant is now called modern Turkey, the one you sees on the map. Yes, exactly. So, the collapse happened at this level. Abdul Hamid was a clever and shrewd figure, but he was weak-willed, meaning he lacked courage. He wasn't brave. He was intelligent and shrewd, so he won his political battles, but as soon as the battle turned to war, he was defeated. Yes, he had a plan that said the Europeans would certainly reach a major clash. So let's preserve the Ottoman army. Yes, until this comes. Yes, at that moment, what were the Europeans actually doing? They were solving their problems at his expense. They'd fight amongst themselves, but to avoid fighting each other, they'd take a piece of the Ottoman Empire. Yes, so the Ottoman Empire continued to shrink during his reign. Then the Europeans clashed after he was deposed. He was deposed in 1914 in World War I. Laughs and you can feel them saying, "Where are you, Abdul Hamid? When you were here, we weren't." Laughs. When Sultan Abdul Hamid took over the Ottoman Empire, geographically speaking, what did it have? Let's see. Abdul-Hamid took over in 1876 and until 1909, as we said, it had all of North Africa except Algeria, because France had already occupied it in 1830, and of course, Morocco wasn't part of it, although some historians, like Dr. Fadel Bayat, say that Morocco was part of the Ottoman Empire. He found documents to that effect. So Abdul-Hamid had Tunisia, and you go on to Egypt, Sudan, the Hejaz, and the Levant, of course, the entire Arabian Peninsula, the Arab world, the Levant, Iraq, and the extensions into the Balkans. Abdul-Hamid experienced a significant contraction during his reign. This major contraction occurred firstly when the Balkans slipped from his grasp. Greece had already been lost, but most of the Balkans fell out of his control. Tunisia was occupied by France, and Cyprus was ceded to the British because they had supported him in the Russo-Turkish War and prevented the invasion of Adrianople. Egypt was occupied, and then Britain occupied Sudan. All of this occurred during Abdul-Hamid Roman II reign. Yes, Bulgaria also fell during his time. He retained it for a while, but then there were defeats. The Greek War of Independence occurred before his reign, around 1825 and later, so it had already begun before he came to power. But this period, as I mentioned, can be considered Abdul-Hamid's era. We lost everything during Selim's reign and the period after him. The only remaining territory under the Ottoman Empire was the Arab East. What was the Arab East? Being with Abdul-Hamid, you feel he was a poor man, a result of the years of weakness and humiliation before him. He inherited it, and leaving it wasn't easy. I mean, I agree with you. If I were in his place and saw the whole situation, I might tell you I don't want to be Sultan, my friend, because the situation was difficult. His uncle was Abul Aziz, and there were soldiers and problems. Abul Aziz was killed, yes. He came after an era of conspiracies and depositions, so there was fear. That's why he was sometimes called Habith Yildiz. He felt that if he left the palace, he might be assassinated, and he was indeed assassinated by the Armenians. Yes, despite all that, he was a strong, intelligent, loyal, and shrewd sultan, but he needed to be courageous and kind. That's why he didn't get along with someone like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, for example. Sultan Abdul-Hamid needs his own story, Professor Muhammad. Yes, and we've already delved into contemporary history, but he'll come with us, God willing, during the period of foreign occupation. When we talk about Egypt, we'll have Abdul-Hamid. Why didn't he intervene to save Egypt? When we talk about Palestine and its occupation, we'll have Abdul-Hamid and his role in preventing the flow of Jewish immigration and his role in preventing the establishment of a Palestinian state. When we talk about the Great Arab Revolt, we'll talk about Abdul-Hamid and how he kept Sharif Hussein under his control and didn't allow him to leave for the Hejaz because he was afraid of him. So, Abdul-Hamid is present with us in the context of the era. Next section, God willing. It's a long, fascinating, and beautiful journey with the Ottoman state, which we haven't discussed, nor have we discussed any of the states that preceded it. Please allow me to use the phrase, "Oh, farther the situation is as follows." Professor Hamoud, look, if we weep and we have the right to weep for Andalusia, and weep and we have the right to weep 10 times over for India, then we should weep 100 times over the fall of the Ottoman Empire. No sincere Muslim can study the history of the Ottoman Empire without finding themselves confronted with a colossal catastrophe that befell the Islamic world when the Ottoman Empire disappeared. A truly colossal catastrophe, and what we are experiencing even now, since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, is that no country sees itself as responsible for Muslims. There isn't one. We saw Gaza Garzar was being slaughtered in front of everyone, and now Sudan is being slaughtered in front of everyone. And of course, not to mention Turkestan, not to mention the Rohingya, not to mention Muslims in the east and west of the earth, even Muslims in India, in Kashmir, and in Assam, and no one sees it as their responsibility to stand up or defend them. The best of those currently in power are helpless, even the best of them, while many of them are complicit and involved. So there is no doubt that whoever wept for Andalusia, or whoever he weeps for the fall of India, the richest country in the world, from the hands of Muslims, so no doubt he will weep 100 times for the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Yes, because after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Professor Muhammad, the cry of that Muslim woman still echoes, "O Arabs, O Muslims, O nation, O rulers," a lost cry, not knowing to whom it is directed. You know you are now a poet. How much we spent, and the people we once ruled now own us. Every defeated one has reclaimed the captives. Nothing remains in their captivity but our captives, and I have not seen the whips of injustice bloodied, without seeing the flesh of our slain upon them. We do not die on the edge of the sword, until even our deaths are ashamed of us. O God, the truth is, the demise of the Ottoman Empire was one of the disasters that befell the Islamic world. Thus the geography of the Ottoman Empire was eroded, and its long journey, which extended for more than 6 centuries, came to an end. Professor Muhammad, we are left with one question, which is the question of sources. Yes, I will leave it for the next episode, God willing. And the next episode is this is a turning point because we will be asking about sources, God willing, and entering a new phase with God's help, which is the phase of foreign colonialism. It is a truly significant phase that awaits you and all of us, and it holds abundant good. So, this is the journey of the Ottoman state. Professor Muhammad, thank you very much. May God bless you. As for you, my brothers, wherever you are, don't forget that, of course, anything we forgot during the period of weakness, collapse, and fall of the Ottoman state, you can add it in the comments so that we can all benefit from it. And whatever good we have achieved in this entire series about the Ottoman state and what came before it is from God Almighty, a blessing from God, and whatever we forgot or made a mistake in or were confused about or anything like that is from ourselves and from Satan. So please excuse us, my brothers, wherever you are. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends. We will meet in the next episode of this good and blessed series. Until then, may you remain in God's care. Goodbye, God. Music to watch more programs about Islamic history and to learn about its events, victories, defeats, leaders, scholars, secrets.